Hello and welcome again to this edition of FLITernetTV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital at the heart of the Florida Internet and Television Studios. We're here in the Technology Pavilion. We are once again joined by the best guests in Florida, two top Democratic consultants in Florida politics. First, I want to introduce Steve Schale. To my right, president of Shale Strategies. He was the state director for the 2008 Obama campaign, famed for being in Time magazine for the point where he told President Obama that he was going to win that election. He's now helping the gubernatorial candidate Glen Graham. We also have Cate, founder of CateCom, some of the most pithy comments in all of Florida politics, and one of the bright minds in Democratic strategies. He's consulting for Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gilliam for his gubernatorial campaign. Gentlemen, welcome and good luck to you and your candidates in this upcoming election.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Can we compliment you too?
Well, sure. Just
stop.
Stop. Just keep it coming. Keep it coming. Just feel free to throw those in as we go. All right. So we are on the precipice of the blue wave, right? This is the word we hear on every Sunday talk show. We see Speaker Paul Ryan. The folks are saying he's leaving because of the blue wave. They're very hopeful. What are your feelings on the blue wave? The reality of it? Let's start at the federal level, and then we'll bring it back to the state. Steve, we'll start with you.
So first of all, the last three midterm elections have been referendums on the president, 06, 10, and 14. And so if history holds to form right now, this should be a referendum on President Trump, which should bode good things for Democrats. I think Democrats have picked up 37 or 38 seats around the country in special elections. Certainly when you see Republicans leaving Congress is an indication they don't want to necessarily serve in the minority. In 2006, I ran the Democratic Party.
You don't think they're just tired of serving?
Listen, I don't know how anybody can spend more than 48 hours in Washington, but no. I mean, a lot of folks who've been in a majority, you've been committee chairs, you've been speaker. The idea of being in the minority doesn't look all that great. But so things look good now. But the reality is we really won't know. It was really into October of 2006, October 2010, before you really began to kind of get your arms around it. But if President Trump's approval rating is where it is today, come October, it's not going to bode well for Republicans.
All right, so Kevin, what are you feeling? What are you seeing from your sources and your allies across the nation?
Well, I remember on the 2008 campaign, Steve was my boss and gave me that opportunity. He put a sign up in the office and it said, underreact. So we want to always kind of approach these things with a cautious optimism, I suppose. But, I'm excited. I see it on the ground. I see it when we're going to these progressive groups. When Mayor Gilliam's out there, he just a couple days ago, he drew a huge crowd in Orlando of folks who were very excited. I'm feeling it, but I'm going to follow Steve's advice and on my optimism and just underreact a little to it.
So underreact, but fingers crossed that there's more to it than just spin.
One historical note. In 2010, which was the best year Republicans have had in the last century, President Obama had a 46% approval rating a week before the election. So it wasn't like Obama's approval rating was better then than Trump's is now. And again, Republicans picked up 68 seats, I think, in the Congress, picked up, I think, 900 seats around the country in the legislature. So again, things do look good for Democrats, but we're still going to have to block and tackle, still have to recruit good candidates and run smart races, and folks have got to turn out and vote.
All right, well, let's talk about the biggest federal race in Florida. You've got Senator Bill Nelson defending his seat. You just saw Governor Scott announce his intentions for that seat. I know that was a big shocker to everybody in the process, like that groundwork hadn't been laid for the last year and a half. Let's talk about that race. How do you see it breaking out? Bill Nelson's there to defend. What are his strengths that you see going into that race? And then we'll hop over to Scott. And where do you think he's going to go? Kevin, let's start with you.
Well, Rick Scott is not Katherine Harris, so let's just establish that perhaps the luckiest guy in Florida politics, Bill Nelson, who's run against Katherine Harris and Connie Mack the fourth, is that how many? The guy who got beat up by Ron Gant. This is Rick Scott, and he has all the money in the world. So he's going to outspend Senator Nelson 2-1, regardless of what Senator Nelson does. What we are finding is a little less impact on the TV dollars that are being spent. So I don't know that Rick Scott can necessarily rely on that. Obviously, Nelson has built up just tremendous amount of goodwill in this state. He's been on the ballot before. He's won many, many races going back a long time, insurance, all these other different races. But so I think that we need to be optimistic about what's going on, but also realistic. And personally, if I could run against anybody other than Rick Scott, I would choose that over running against Rick Scott. Yeah. Steve was on this campaign with me, but Rick Scott outspent Charlie Crist in 2014 by $33 million on TV. $33 million on TV outspent.
It's actually 41 million. Scott spent 81 million on TV.
Okay. Well, I'll have to go double check.
It's even more. But the point,
All right,
yeah.
so Steve, to you, how are you seeing that race? Where do you see the deciding factors?
So I think there's a couple things in play. First of all, it's important to think about Florida. The last 4 really big elections we've had, the last 2 governor's races and the last 2 presidentials, have all been decided by 1 point. So there's no reason to think this race isn't going to fall into that same category. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of what we faced in 2012 in the re-elect with President Obama and Mitt Romney. In that race, you had 2 candidates that were exceptionally well known. The electorate was very well defined. In a lot of ways, the race started like 47, 47, 48, 48, regardless of what the poll said. And functionally, it was there. And we spent $150 million between the 2 campaigns, fighting over 4 or 5% of the vote.
Right.
I think this one is really pretty similar. I think Nelson has 2 things going for him. I mean, first of all, he has been fortunate with his opponents. But all he's done is won 5 consecutive statewide elections, which is
that's it.
Yeah,
I mean, right.
Which has never happened before in Florida history. If he wins 6, he will. 5 ties Bob Graham, 6 sets him on his own.
Okay.
Secondly, he's kind of like that football player who's got a nose for the end zone. He's never going to be pretty. He's never going to jump up and down and have a great dance. But the ball seems to get across the line every single time.
Yeah.
He does very well in parts of the state the Democrats used to do well in, up in North Florida. He does better with suburban white voters. And again, given where the electorate is today, it's just hard for me to see him. He's not going to beat Scott by a lot. But again, I think the edge to him, it goes to him right now.
So when you see, there's the old adage, right, and this is more in coalitions and things like that, but more people will turn out to vote no on something they're angry about than they will something they're in favor of. I mean, that's kind of, if it bleeds, it leads sort of deal. Does it look like people, at least on the D side, and they beat the Republicans as far as registered voters in Florida by a bunch, are they angry enough to turn out in a bigger way for that Senate race than the Republicans in a favorable way for Governor Scott?
Well, I mean, again, my take on this is if you look back at the last 3 midterm elections, there's a segment of the electorate which is very stable, and that electorate, leans maybe a tiny bit Republican, and then there's sort of an expansion electorate that shows up each time. In 2006, that expansion electorate were general election voting Democrats who don't vote in midterms. They were younger voters. And they overwhelmingly voted for the Democrats on the ballot. And Democrats actually had an advantage on Election Day because of it. In 2010, you saw the opposite. You saw Republicans who don't vote in midterms show up to express frustration at President Obama. Same thing happened in 2014. And so if you look at the special elections we've had recently, take the one recently in Sarasota, what you saw there were, 35 to 55-year-old women, mostly Democratic women, who don't vote in primaries in general, show up in a special election. So,
and you've seen that in Miami,
saw it in Miami,
yeah.
saw it in St. Petersburg. So, again, I think that expansion electorate right now looks very good for us. And again, but we're still 6 months out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So either way, Governor Scott's leaving the biggest office at the state level empty. So the Dems are.
Let's just take a moment to.
No. That's just an expression, right? So.
We could do like the Greeks and just draw straws between the 3 of us.
Right. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. So the governor race is there. Let's break it down through the governor's candidates. First of all, you guys have some vested interests, so feel free to disclose or not disclose. But I think the folks that are in the process and they'll watch, they know where you guys are. But let's start with Mayor Levine. Let's break down his campaign. How is, and we'll break for all of them. How are they distinguishing themselves from one another in this race? Let's go with Mayor Levine. Let's start with you, Kevin.
Well, he's got a lot of money. I mean, this is a guy who has already pledged and spent $7 million the last time I checked. We booked on TV. So he's already spent 6.5 or so of it, and by the time this airs, it'll be $7 million. He's been on TV in a vacuum. I mean, no other candidate in this primary is communicating on television. It kind of boggles my mind that he's not leading by 35% of the vote right now, given all that he's spent. I mean, this is Jeff Green, Rick Scott kind of money that he's throwing, or more actually, that he's throwing earlier on TV in a vacuum. So it's shocking that he's not up by as much as he should be. But
Well, but I'll say that there's probably something to the fact that Adam Goodman, who's run many Republican races in this race, is one of his #1 advisors, and his specialty is telling the message visually. So
he's doing a piss poor job then,
right.
And he probably shouldn't be consulting for a Democrat who's running a Democratic primary.
All right.
All due respect.
Yeah, no, hey, that's fine. That's fine. So okay, well, no, it's fine, but that's yours to say. Yours to say. Okay, so all right. So anything on Mayor Levine's campaign from your perspective?
One thing I'll say, and Kevin's been in the same boat, it is always more fun to be in the campaign that can spend whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was on a panel with a guy from the Scott campaign in 2011, and they were talking about all the smart stuff they did. And I remember running a campaign in 2008. We didn't make hard choices either. Right. And that's really the challenge that Graham, Gilliam, and King all have, is that none of them are going to be able to match Levine dollar for dollar. And so everybody kind of has to find their path, what makes the most sense. Gilliam's path is going to be different than Gwen's path, going to be different than Chris' path.
Let's talk about
Levine has the ability to go kind of do whatever he wants. But what's interesting in Florida is, so far, I mean, we've never had a self-funder actually succeed. Right. And so, there's not, whereas the Republicans can point to Rick Scott, on our side, the one who tried it, Jeff Green, ended up getting crushed in the end. So we'll see where it ends.
Okay, so let's hit the rest of the candidates. And let's start with the hometown favorite, at least from Tallahassee's perspective, Mayor Gilliam. How is Mayor Gilliam defining his race, and how is he being the unique leader in this race?
Well, I think the big bet that we're making is that people want an authentic, genuine candidate who has some lived experience and knows what it's like to be a working dad and kind of make his own way despite many challenges, including being the son of a construction worker and a school bus driver. So I think his path really is telling his story and relating to those primary voters, and also having the only progressive record in the race. I mean, this is a guy who is clearly the most progressive candidate. Clearly, we're making the bet that Democrats want a Democrat on the ballot in 2018 in that general election who is actually going to turn out the voters that we need. Like Steve said, it's a 1% kind of back and forth. Right. If we can get our voters excited, which we have failed to do miserably in recent history, failed to get our voters excited, that's what Andrew Gilliam is doing. He's drawing crowds everywhere. He's the only one that can draw a crowd. He's the only one that's getting people super excited about this race. That's our big bet, is that people want that genuine, authentic progressive.
Well, so you've got the progressive brand, and then we go to Glen Graham, right? Gwen arguably, has had a more moderate, kind of stance in the election. That can be good or bad depending on how you see it. How is she telling her story out on the trail?
Well, I mean, Gwen's interesting. Gwen she comes from obviously a family in politics, but she really didn't get into politics until 2014. I mean, she worked in school district system. She has been a working mom. I mean, she comes at this thing sort of again growing up in the business, but with a pretty real life experience. The other thing Gwen offers is that she's only one of the 3 or the 4 that's actually been to war and won. I think Phil Levine, for example, in his entire career has had less than 9,000 or 10,000 people vote for him. Gwen Graham faced down $7 million in negative ads, $300,000 from the NRA, knows what it takes to win.
And some of the most conservative dirt in the state of Florida as well.
And to Kevin's point about being able to both talk to swing voters and excite the base, if you look at the difference between Sink and Christ, I would disagree with Kevin on one thing. So Sink did very well up here, much better than Democrats usually do, did not do well in South Florida. Christ actually won the base progressive counties in Florida by 100,000 more votes than Alex Sink did. But he got so crushed in the middle part of the state going forward that he couldn't win. Florida's one of these places where it's not a turnout state or a persuasion state. You have to do both to win. And if you look at Gwen's congressional campaign, she won Leon County by a huge margin, but was able in places like Bay and Liberty to keep it reasonable, beat Chris, I think, by 6 or 7 points overall in the district. And that's what it's going to take to win an election in November.
And on that, the bet this is a Democratic primary, so obviously, and I voted for Gwen. She was my congresswoman.
Andrew endorsed her.
Right, yeah, of course. We're going to endorse Steve Sutherland. But a lot of us were disappointed. She voted against Obama repeatedly. She ran this hashtag North Florida Way kind of approach, which in a Democratic primary, on the issues like guns, she's been on the wrong side. Obviously she's trying to revive that. But I think the bet that we're making is that Democrats want someone who has been progressive their entire career and not kind of going into that conservative. And remember, we're talking about a Democratic primary.
Right.
Calling yourself a conservative Democrat is not going to go very well.
All right, so we're getting a little tight on time, but we got one more competitor in this space. Mr. King, talk to us about how he's doing and what do you think his play is?
I like Chris King a lot as a person. I didn't know anything about him until he got in the race. He, probably like Kevin, the first time I met him, really, really attractive in terms of the issues he talks about. Young guy. I honestly don't know if he can raise enough money to put himself in a place where he makes it a four-way race or not. I assume his view of the thing is that the first three candidates all kind of becomes a shabacle, and he can kind of run up the middle as the alternative. But Chris King is a name that you may not hear a lot between now and August, frankly, in this race. But I think after August going forward, he's a guy who's going to have a long career in this state.
Kevin?
I call him the Tim Tebow of Florida politics because you can't meet him and not like him. Like, even if you want to not like him, he's just, like Steve said, I think he's a future superstar in our party.
All right. So 10-second roundtable. What predictions do you see in this election? Any surprises that we're going to see? Anything? What do you got top of mind?
Well, I'm excited about the Jaguars draft. I think if we can get a good tight end, we'll be good. No, I've learned. I'm old enough now to know that most predictions are pretty pointless. I think it's important for, as long as Democrats keep blocking and tackling in the way they are, recruiting good candidates, which are seeing legislative races on down the ballot, and Trump continues to not figure out how to be president, I think it'll be good here in November.
Right. Kevin?
I think it'll be great, and I will predict that the person with the most votes will win. And
whoa, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's still Florida. It's still Florida. Well, I have a prediction. Any Democratic candidate that reaches out to the two of you and that works with you, they're going to be in much better footing. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the program. We appreciate you being on. That's all the time we have for today's program. Make sure you hit us up on our Facebook and Twitter feeds, both at FLInternetTV. And for now, thanks for tuning in.